Greetings one and all, and welcome to this hopefully fairly brief update for Robocraft. An update is hitting tomorrow, which is the Aeroflak Sentinel and Power update. Now normally, when it's a small update like this, I tend not really to cover it because it's easy enough to cover in a small video or just in my series in general. However, there is a couple of major mechanic changes inside the game with this update, which I think needs to be covered in a little bit more detail. So, let's just get straight into it. First of all, there is a brand new weapon again, and although this isn't really a new weapon, it's a downscaling, it's still pretty cool. It is the Aeroflak Sentinel. You may have guessed the name by the title of the video and the title of the patch itself. It is a smaller, more versatile version of the Aeroflak Guardian, which allows for more freedom of building without being restrained to a single large turret. It has a mass of 1,380, which is below half of the weight of the Guardian, which is the original flak weapon, and costs 150 CPU, which is exactly half of the old flak variant. Now, this is a little bit weird because people are already complaining that flak is a bit of a hard counter. It counters too well against certain robot types, and now we have a smaller version, more robots will likely be using them. I do like this concept, but we'll see how good or bad it is for the game once it is actually released. And with that, we move on to the main part of this update, CPU to power. Since the conception of the power system within Robocraft, all robots have the same amount of power, unless of course they're using a power module, but I'm speaking about the base level. They have a base amount of power which regenerates at the same speed. This doesn't matter if you're just a single block with a gun or a massive vehicle with lots of guns, which can cause late game to be a little bit slow. Because of this, there is a new system now in place that simply boils down to smaller CPU robots have less power to play with, and larger CPU robots rather have more power. I guess that statement was actually correct with that weird little mistake there. So robots at 1125 CPU will not see a difference. That is the new benchmark. That is where the CPU to power ratio is exactly the same as it used to be. At the extreme ends of the spectrum, however, at 1750 CPU, which is the CPU cap, we'll be seeing an increase of 25% in both maximum power and the power regeneration speed. This is because we're still keeping the same regeneration speed, taking 10 seconds to get to the maximum power of your robot, regardless of the changes, so please bear that in mind. Having more power does not mean it's going to take longer for you to simply power up. This should hopefully mean at the maximum CPU battles may be a little bit quicker, since we're going to have a across the board 25% power increase, and of course 25% power regeneration increase, and thus more damage per second. However, robots of 500 CPU and lower will see a decrease of 25% power and power regeneration respectively. So lower CPU robots not able to do as much damage, not able to have as powerful alpha strikes with many weapons, and in general may slow down combat a lot, which isn't necessarily a terrible thing, but we'll see how that goes. Their reasoning for this is one of the main benefits of this new mechanic is that low CPU games will be less dominated by larger burst weapons, leading to fewer instant deaths and an overall more enjoyable experience. Following this, there are a series of balance changes and changes to steering itself. Rotors can now be supported by camera steering, which means, yes indeed, you can now have helicopters which strafe correctly, so that is very, very cool, and I will be using this very, very soon. And then we get into balance. Again, normally this is not something I really talk about too much, but there are some serious changes with this. First of all, the Aeroflak explosion radius has been reduced by 15%, meaning you have to be more accurate for it to actually explode. Secondly, and this is a really nice thing in my opinion, they have increased the height a robot needs to be from the ground before the Aeroflak explosion actually triggers. It doesn't actually give an exact amount of this, but that simply means that hovers are very unlikely to detonate the flak, although mega hovers may still do it at maximum height if you're using a fairly light vehicle, or depending on how you've actually built the vehicle in terms of where the centre of mass is and where the centre of a lift is. So that's something really nice in my opinion, because I've always felt that flak shouldn't be a anti-hover weapon, but sometimes in some battles that's exactly what it turns out to be. Now we get on to laser changes. Lasers have been changed quite a bit, and in my opinion, looking at the numbers before doing any gameplay, it looks good, because in my opinion lasers have kind of lost their point in the game. Again, completely subjective there, but in my opinion lasers are one of the weakest weapons at the moment and don't really get much use, especially in the larger CPU battles. So laser projectiles are now twice as fast as they currently are, which is kind of amazing, especially against airborne units or just fast units in general. The laser camera shake has been reduced, which I am oddly happy with, and the laser projectile spread has been reduced, meaning all lasers are now more accurate, and I will hopefully be putting up an image right now so you can see all the numbers and stuff if Editor Lathrix actually does this. So looking at the numbers, it basically breaks down to something pretty simple, which I'm really happy with. We're going to be shooting faster and doing more damage overall, except for the damage per shot is going to be a little bit less. I am very happy with this, especially as we can see the change to the laser disintegrator, which in my opinion felt absolutely awful to use. The slow fire rate of that thing made me feel like I was playing with a really bad rail. And finally then, we move on to improvements and changes. I will not be covering the bug fixes, although if you would like to read them, they are in the description below. At least the link to the full patch notes is, if you would like to have a look at absolutely everything. So a lot of these changes you won't really notice as a player who's been playing for a while, but some of them are pretty good to know. The first one I think people should know of is that the max weapon counts, which was previously called the nominal count, no longer have a slight benefit for going beyond them. Essentially, if it says the maximum weapon count is 10, going to 15 guns will only give you extra redundancy. After the 10th weapon, you will have no improvement in fire rate. Before this, there was a tiny benefit after the nominal count, although it was nominal. It was a very small amount, almost nothing whatsoever. So just bear in mind that if you are now trying to go for absolute maximum DPS with a weapon, after the maximum count, you get absolutely no bonus whatsoever. So that's pretty good, to be honest. The second thing is that the power module is going to be relative to your existing power regeneration, which means it's still going to increase your power, the cooldown of your power, the regeneration of your power from 10 seconds down to 8 seconds. So even if you have got the increased energy of being a maximum CPU bot, it's still going to increase it by the same percentage as before, just with the new higher numbers, so it is just as effective. So if you are a person who has purchased the power module, which of course is very expensive, don't worry, you can still use it and it will be just as good as it used to be. Now this one's a little bit weird, so please bear with me. Components no longer need to be destroyed to deal damage to the robot, so a 98 CPU mech leg that has lost half of its armor will only be considered as having 49 CPU of health remaining for the health bar. This means that defense stacking with high cost components instead of armor will be less effective. Basically, those very weird robots which are just made of mech legs and aero rods will be far less effective, as you can spread the damage over all of the components and still kill the target if you've done significant damage to all of the components. Of course, mech legs are a good example because they have high health and also high shield, which means it can be difficult to kill one in particular, especially if you're doing splash damage to the target and not really focusing too much. But now, that's going to be a bit less effective. Anything that really relies on a lot of functional components is going to suffer a lot from this change. I don't know if I agree or disagree with that. It certainly is a weird way of looking at health, but we'll see that as it continues. After that, there's not really all too many things I really want to mention here because, well, to be perfectly honest, you won't really notice them all that much. I think the only thing I will say is that the front-facing lasers now have a turning arc of 180 degrees, which is pretty nice. They are trying to make front-facing lasers a little bit better. They are already slightly better than the regular top-mounted lasers if they are mounted forwards. If you are using camera controls, purely because of how the lasers spin, it can take some time to go from left to right, which of course is damage being lost if you are rapidly turning left to right, which can happen a lot if you are using mouse-based controls, well, camera-based controls, rather than keyboard-based controls. And with that, I think that's pretty much everything I would like to cover with this patch. It's definitely a patch filled with a lot of small changes, most of which I do agree with. The smaller flak is a little bit concerning to me, but if it's anything like the smaller shotgun, we're probably not going to see all that much play of it, because the smaller shotgun, so far to me, and to most people I have been speaking to, is a bit of a disappointment. Low damage, high energy cost, all that stuff. I was going to add something else there, but decided to cut it out. There really isn't anything else I would like to talk about with this patch. There are just so many small things I could talk about it for far too long. So thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed the video, then of course, likes, favourites, shares, comments, all that good stuff helps out me, helps out the channel, and most importantly, shows that Robocraft is a series you wish to see continued in the future. In the description below, there will be a link to the full patch notes, which will include the bug fixes and anything I have left out, which is actually quite a few things. There were just far too many small updates with this particular update to cover everything in a timely fashion. It's already almost 12 minutes, so thank you again, and goodbye. There will be a gameplay video coming out soon with the small flak.